watched it happen, which is really kind of cool. So when you go to the Grand Canyon, you see the same thing. Well, I guess nobody was there that's living today that watched it, huh? But we do know somebody that was there that watched it happen, right? So it's kind of a neat, in our backyard, we have some really neat evidences. And of course, you know about the Missoula flood, and we're going to be talking about that at the end a little bit too. It's very similar, or only on a larger scale. So Pat and his wife Vicki, she's in the back there. I encourage you to meet her too. I'm sure you will. They are now living in Yakima, correct? You just moved there, right?
Yeah, Yakima Valley, yeah.
Yakima Valley. And they have a ministry called Northwest Treasures. And I remember meeting Pat and Vicki, and I remember some afternoons in their garage taking large rocks like this on their concrete floor with a big sledgehammer and smashing them up so that he could put them and build in their little kits. And that's one of the fun activities that I did. It was pretty interesting. You should have seen their garage. You talk about a garage packed with stuff. I mean, it was like rocks and fossils and rocks. There was no other stuff in it. It was fun. So Pat and Vicki are very active in teaching young people, and they love to do that. And that's their ministry focus, because they want young people to start to learn to think and visualize their faith through what they see in the geology, the geological world. So Pat, why don't you come on up? He's going to give a talk tonight about interpreting the rock layers, correct? Yep, so come on up. Let's give him a welcome, huh? After his presentation, we're going to have a little Q&A time. So keep your questions for him, and we'll have time after.
Okay. Well, I can hear myself. Well, good evening. And, this has really become a habit. Speaking here in late January, I'm not sure exactly how it got started, but it's always right near our anniversary. So this year we're celebrating our 43rd wedding anniversary. And we always manage to celebrate it right here. Although I think now we've got to do some changing. We did move. In fact, I want to relate a little bit of a story to you. This is going to be our new Geology Learning Center. I've had this 2 times before. Each time the owner of the building decided they wanted to do something else with the building, so we had to pack it up and move everything. And you talk about garages full of stuff. I mean, the garage is just the leftovers. The stuff that goes into our learning center, it's a lot of stuff, including a replica of a recent T-Rex skull that was found in Alberta, and some other large fossils we have in there. But so the last time we had to pack it up, we decided, this is nuts. We're not going to do this anymore. The next time we do this, I'm going to own that building. So opportunity came up here in August to purchase a piece of property out in Wapato, Washington. We're about 5 miles outside of Wapato, and with a straight shot of Mount Adams out our back door. So we're about 50 miles from Mount Adams. And on this piece of property, not only was a big house and even a bigger garage for more rocks, fossils and rocks, but was our new building for our Geology Learning Center. So to date, we have our insulation done. We've got all the electrical wiring done, and we're going to start working on the ceiling next, and then the walls, and then our displays will start going into place. And we need a lot of help. We do a project, we raise a little bit of money, do the project, raise a little bit more money, do the project, and so on. So if you are interested in giving to that at all, any amount is appreciated. We figured that the The ceiling and the rewiring of the new lights are probably going to take us somewhere around $6,000 to do. So if you've got some money laying around, that's not very funny these days, is it? I don't know if anybody who has money laying around these days. But if you want to contribute to it, it is tax deductible. We are a nonprofit organization, educational organization, and it'd be greatly appreciated. What we're going to do with this learning center, by the way, is just a short walk. It's, 50 feet away from our house. So it is right there. It's got a huge parking lot. It's just all set up for us. And one of my goals has been even since the 70s, to concentrate on trying to equip young families and their children. And of course, this is where retirees get involved. They've got a lot more life experience, but oftentimes, like the families, they don't quite know how to put these principles into practice. We're taught the Bible is God's word and its authority on everything in life. But when it comes to understanding Earth history, we're maybe not quite sure. I mean, these geologists, they have about 200 years now under their belt, and there are thousands and thousands of them who all seem to have the same answers. And they've worked together, they've charted things, and they've contributed a lot to the whole field. But unfortunately, most of it is contrary to what the scriptures teach. And I can remember when I became a Christian back in 1972, I had a lot of questions. And the doctrine in the Bible, I didn't have any problem with it. Once I became a Christian, it made sense. But this age of the earth and a great worldwide flood really took some time for me to figure out what was going on. It's a complete contradiction. It's not an attempt to harmonize the biblical approach. It's a complete contradiction. And to this day, I don't know too many churches that really spend the time equipping their youth and families to understand, first of all, the secular approach. What's going on here? How do they think? How did they arrive at this thinking? Why do they have such a completely contradictory view to that of the scriptures? And most people can't answer that question. Vicki and I are involved a lot in homeschooling ministry across the United States and even around the world. We have a lot of our stuff that goes over to New Zealand. One of my books was just recently translated into German, and a fellow really enjoyed it so much he wanted to do that and get it out all over Germany. So, there are things like that that are happening. And so my goal here with this learning center is to have the displays and a place to equip families, especially, on how to understand this stuff and how to interpret, how to develop their thinking processes so that Genesis can explain everything they see around them. Should be able to. If it is true, it should be able to. We just need to find out, how does that work? And so that's what we're about doing. Again, we can really use your help there. It's a big building. It's about 20 feet high, 1,400 square feet. And if you want to contribute, Vicki has some envelopes on the table back there. You can feel free to do that. A couple of other things that we do is we sponsor our Yellowstone Creation Adventures each year. This year, last year we added our high school lab. It's a 4-day or a 2.5-day lab that, especially for high school kids, where we're actually out in the field putting into practice a lot of the principles that we're learning and seeing Yellowstone in that way. So it's a 2.5-day laboratory for that. And then our family trips, and this year we have 2 large high schools that are contracting me to take their high school students through Yellowstone in a week. Each one lasts a week, and they'll learn biblical principles about Yellowstone. So we do that. We also have a family geology camp. This usually in June each year. It's a 4-day camp where we have lots of training for the kids. We do some rock identification, some field work. We examine the edge of the Columbia River. They're right off the Columbia River. You could almost jump in from where the cabins and things are. But all of those, we want to invite you to participate, and especially for you retirees, this is a chance for you to just kind of add this to your developing ministry to your grandkids and others, and really get some pull or some weight with the younger kids. I think this is really where your ministry is, frankly. And I'm moving very rapidly into that direction. My plans are not to retire. It'll be forced retirement if it is, but I want to just keep going. And so I start all over again. We have our youngest grandchild is 2 years, and oldest one graduated from high school. So we're at it again here with the youth. But that's really where I think our future of our churches and the future really of our countries to have any hope, we have got to teach the young people on how to think about all of this stuff. This is the most attacked area of the church there is. Church is split. How old is the earth? And that raises more ire amongst churches than just about anything else. Anyway, we need to be equipped, and that's what we're all about. Okay, so tonight's topic is interpreting the rock layers, how to interpret them. So let's start in here. First of all, we want to define geology. It means the study of the earth. That's the the English meaning of the word. Comes from 2 Greek words. In secular geology, interpreting the rock layers has always been a product of, number one, manual correlation. See, this geologic timetable that you see here, as a kid, I grew up being taught that the geologic timetable was fact. It was a fact of science, fact of geology. These were the rock layers that were in the earth. Someone told me years ago that if all of these layers were actually there, stacked the way this picture shows it, the geologic timetable would be, in reality, over 600 miles thick. Well, the crust of the earth is a maximum of about 30 miles or so. So there is a lot of it missing, and geologists acknowledge it. About 60% of the record is missing. So I want to know, how did they get this to stack up this way? It certainly can't be found. I remember struggling as a kid. I grew up in Montana near the Bighorn River and Little Horn River. I had a great time finding dinosaur bones and fossils. It was a paradise for me as a kid. But I'd take my little geology book out in the field and I'd scratch my head because I'd say, all right, now I see this rock layer here, the Cretaceous. Okay, I understand that here. But where is the stuff that's supposed to go on top, and where's the stuff supposed to go on the bottom? And then my dad would take me 50 miles away to the dinosaur fields. It's horizontal, and there we have all the dinosaurs. Everything I was finding over here were great sea creatures. Everything over here were land animals, purely land animals. And so it really did set up a conflict in my mind, but I never thought much about it because I was being brainwashed. I read every single book I could on secular geology. Well, that's all we had was secular geology. We didn't call it that. It was the science of geology. One of the big things that caught my attention as a senior in college was it finally dawned on me that everything I was being taught in geology, well, just about everything, about 80% of it, that's my figure, but about 80% of it has nothing to do with science at all. It has to do with philosophy, interpretations about what's happening in the earth. One of the clues to that is just go back and read some of the histories of the great discoveries, and you'll find that the ages of them have shifted, and what we thought they were in the past has totally changed here in the future. And I thought, well, I don't know, that didn't sound much like science to me. It sounds like changing opinion and interpretations. Well, so that's what the geologic timetable is. The last 200 years, it's being built up by manual correlation, number one. Number two, evolutionary belief. One of the reasons the layers are all stacked this way is due to the belief that life evolved from simple and developed into complex creatures. So obviously, you stack a table up like this, you're going to be putting the simple creatures on the bottom and the most complex creatures on the top. Now that's how the geologic timetable is arranged. Number three, it's been a product of uniformitarian thinking. Back in the 1800s, a man by the name of Charles Lyell, incidentally, is called the White Knight of geology, as he was the one who delivered us all from the myths and the legends and the ravages of the church doctrine and teachings. And so he's called the White Knight of geology. He developed this whole thinking of uniformitarianism, which really means, if you put the words together, ism is a belief. So it's a belief in uniform processes and rates over millions and millions of years. Now, it should dawn on you that very little of that has actually been observed. In fact, if geology is only about 200 years old, obviously, that's quite a statement to make. The last 4.6 billion years has been the result of uniform processes and rates, geological processes and rates. Well, how do they know that? I mean, if we've only observed about 200 years, now that's the records that we have, how do we make this sweeping judgment that Earth history is as a result of this kind of thinking? But that's what was accepted in geology. By the end of the 1800s, there wasn't one university left who referred to Genesis when they talked about the creation and the evolution of the earth. They wouldn't refer to it anymore. It just disappeared. And it was a result of the uniformitarian thinking. All of these have been combined within a scientific vocabulary. That's part of what really makes the whole subject convoluted. It's backed by all kinds of scientific thinking or vocabulary. And if you don't know the vocabulary, of course, you're going to get lost in it. Geology pedagogy has always been about being properly educated in how to understand the rocks and what they mean. So here we need to ask the question, well, what does properly educated mean? Does that mean you have 4 years with a college degree in geology? Does it mean 8 years? Does it mean 16 years? Of course, with each degree you get, now you're challenged to go on, get the master's degree, get the doctorate degree. You're starting to specialize in different fields of geology. What is properly educated? And no one has yet defined that. That's a little unnerving. Two is, what is that education? What are you supposed to be learning when you study this? And for the most part, you are learning what others have put together who are in the same field. So you've got uniformitarians teaching young, empty minds and developing more uniformitarians who develop more uniformitarians and so on. Now, that's what's called peer review. But it's all the same peers. You don't let in these quacks that have different viewpoints on Earth history. See, that would muddy up the water. But wait a minute, peers could involve a lot of conflicting ideas, but that's not the way it works. You are channeled into one way of learning and interpreting and understanding what you are to believe about the rock layers out there. And woe is you if you differ from that. So what sources are acceptable? You got to be very careful what you read and what you listen to, because they'll determine who you get to work with. Some of these guys that are famous geologists or biologists, paleontologists, young kids want to be able to go to college and study with these guys. Well, you must toe the line. It's learning everything they learn, thinking everything they think, studying everything they studied, and so you are an exact carbon copy of your instructor. Now, that's kind of a scriptural thing, isn't it? Jesus said, everyone who is fully trained will be like their master. And that's what Jesus does to us. He trains us so we can be more and more like him. But you see the real difference in standard. The one standard relies totally on what other men have learned, developed, and taught in the last 200 years. But Jesus, our master, has taught this stuff since the very beginning. So, the very first verse of Genesis, in the beginning, God. And Jesus was there in the beginning, wasn't he? According to John chapter 1. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being, and through him, apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. So which master are we going to really be brainwashed by? Well, I'd rather have the one who created me. And that's a choice I made. But it also means that in geology, which is really not a pure science. In fact, the joke around geologists is that geology is often called the stepchild of the sciences. Because, for instance, in chemistry and in physics, you learn formulas. Everything you learn in physics and chemistry is based on formulas. And so you figure out what you can do and what you can't do. And sometimes, I know as a kid, I really did a lot of stuff with chemistry. I had this little lab in our basement. I was doing all kinds of stuff I shouldn't be doing. But most of the way I approached it was by accident. So, I mean, there were a few big accidents in our basement as a result. But these kinds of things in chemistry and physics they're formulas that you follow. Whereas in geology, about 80% of it is really learning the way of thinking about geology. That's what's the most important thing in geology. The science in geology really is very simple to learn. And I'm going to go through that now. I'm going to start by asking a question here. How old is this mountain? Some of you may have seen this. Others you look at it and you say, man, it's sure an ugly thing. Well, this is Republic Mountain. It's right outside of Cook City, Montana, and it's part of the Absaroka Range, the volcanic range, so it's part of the whole Yellowstone ecosystem. This mountain is it's very notable to geologists. Most people drive by it and say, what an ugly mountain. So we can use this as a good training ground. This is what we do with our students. So first thing you notice is that, well, let's start here. There are no dates on the rocks. Now this is a little different when you're coin collecting. How many of you have ever had a coin collection? Have you? Yeah. You know, most of the value in your money, besides being in good shape, is the date on it. And that's very important. Well, the date's stamped on the coin, so you know exactly how old it is. But this mountain doesn't have any dates on the rocks. In fact, no mountains, no rocks, no bones, no shells in geology have the dates written on them. This was kind of an epiphany for me as a kid. I picked up a rock one time and it all of a sudden hit me. There are no dates on this. How old is this? I don't know how to tell this. You know, this guy. So you scramble to your geology book and they tell you exactly how old it is. But wait a minute. Really, how do you know the age of it? So I think it's a very important question to address. Another question is, were there any eyewitnesses to the formation of this mountain? No. Well, did it take a long time to form? Did it form overnight? What's going on here? Well, there are no eyewitnesses, so there's no real scientific way to answer these two questions. Now, if you listen to secular geologists, they will tell you that this mountain is about 50 million years old. Okay, all right. If you're a Bible believer and you take your Bible seriously, you should be at this point running into a big conflict in your faith, because there's no room in Genesis for a 50 million year old earth. I don't care how many ways you interpret different meanings of different words. There's no way to get 50 million years out of the book of Genesis. Figured it out one time. There's something like 100,000 generations missing between each generation from Adam to Noah. So you've got all of these guys spread out over hundreds of thousands of years. What kind of a genealogy is that? My mother spent a lot of time putting together a genealogy of our family back to William the Conqueror. And now a lot of people are impressed by that, oh, that's kind of cool. But the real question is, well, where are the facts that show me that you are connected to William the Conqueror? She did it all the way back. Grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, and so on, all the way back, William the Conqueror. It stopped there. She wasn't able to find any other sources there. Of course, I kind of poured, rain on her fire there. I said, well, we're all related anyway to Noah, so we already know that. But you've got to have the genealogy that takes you back to that. That's exactly what Genesis does. It puts up a genealogy that traces us back. Now, geologists will tell you, well, we determined this mountain to be 50 million years old through painstaking research and scientific knowledge. That's what you're taught. And so if you look at the geologic timetable, you locate the 50 million years, the age of Republic Mountain, and you find that it's right in this period of time called the Eocene. Eocene sounds real scientific. This is part of that vocabulary I was talking to you about. And it just means dawn of the recent. So that's what the word means. And now you get into notice all the other scenes in the Cenozoic era, this scene, that scene, and so on. It's more new, more new, most new. This is really what you're getting into when you do this. Well, what do they mean? Well, you'll have to go back to the person who named them, which happened to be Charles Lyell. And now you begin to put the pieces together and find out just how much a personal interpretation or bias does influence how you put things together. So I think this is what I do with kids. A lot of times I've taught a lot of teens, and they just kind of get drowned by all of this apologetic stuff. It's difficult to remember. I don't have a very good memory, so memorizing all kinds of facts and figures and quotes by this person and that, it's just not my thing. But I found too that a lot of teens are like that. Knowledge does not come easy. So what I felt like there is a real need to do is to equip our teens to easily be able to engage in dialogue with people in a simple way that puts them on the hot seat, not me. I don't know if you've ever engaged in a conversation with a person who seems to have a fact or a figure and seems to know more than you do. And all of a sudden, guess what? You're on the defensive, aren't you? But our job is to help them be on the defensive so that they have to give an account. We no longer have to give an account. We have believed the story. We have entered the kingdom of God by faith, and now it's up to them to do the same. So we have to challenge them to question their own faith. And I figured out 4 words I think that will do it. So let's define those here. First one is science. What does the word science mean? Now, I have asked that question to groups, and I get for every, if there are 30 people, they write down a definition. There are 30 different meanings of the word science. Some of them will be close. Some of them will have a few similar ideas. But no one seems to know exactly what you're talking about by the science. We went through this a few years ago. The whole COVID mess convinced us of one thing. We don't know what the science is. No one can define the science. I don't know if you experienced that, but I certainly thought a lot about that. What is the science? It's the big elephant in the room, isn't it? But science deals with observation and testing. That's a big part. That's what science really is. It comes from a Latin word meaning knowledge. And it's a certain kind of knowledge. Knowledge that's based in observation and testing. That's what it is. So if something is being reported to you as science and there's really no observation and testing, well, it's certainly not science. It may be a scientist who says it. They may be able to marshal 500 other scientists who teach it. But if you can't observe it and you can't test it, it's not science, it's something else. This is the problem with the Big Bang idea of the origin of the universe. How can you observe that or test it? I don't know anybody who's been able to do it. Well, it's not science, it's something else. So we go on to the next word. And by the way, I'll tell kids, look, just ask the question. What part of the statement that you told me is science? Popular one is dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. Well, what part of that statement is actually science? And now what you've done is you've just put them on the defensive, which is exactly where they need to be. That's when the Holy Spirit begins to work. But so long as they take the dominant role in the conversation, it's just hard to break through that. But if I can get a person to be accountable for the way they think and what they're expressing, perfect. I don't need to do much of anything else. Let the Holy Spirit do his job. But it's exactly I learned that, I think, from my own mother. When I was a senior in college, my life was falling apart. And went home one day, and my mom and dad both told me, look, we're concerned about the changes in your life. And my mother looked at me and she said, are you still going to church? And I said, nah, but, kind of cocky. I'm still looking around. And she looked at me. She said, it's your soul. And she got up and left the room. See what that did? That was the last time I argued with my mother. I didn't do it after that because I realized I am responsible for finding the answer to this question. And boy, did she witness. I mean, she didn't lay out all kinds of fancy stuff. It was just one thing that shook my conscience to the core. And we've got to figure that out with people so the Holy Spirit can work. History deals with eyewitness accounts and documents. So the geologic timetable is purported by scientists to be a genuine reflection of Earth history. Where are the documents? Where are the eyewitnesses? Well, there are none. So it's not history. Now, our strength here is the Bible. What's the Bible? It's a history book. The very first verse of Genesis is, in the beginning, God created. That's a statement of history, not doctrine. It's a statement about what God did in the beginning of it all. That's my strength. My history book is the Bible. A third word called philosophy deals with beliefs and biases. This has to do with the thinking. And I'll tell you, the philosophy is a very subtle thing. Pretty soon, scientists begin telling you things that are philosophy, but they're telling them to you as scientific facts. We have to be alert to that. So taking the science, when we look at Republic Mountain, means correctly identifying the rocks. Nothing about the age there, is there? We're going to examine the science of the rocks. The first thing we notice is that big stuff on the top is volcanic rock. Just a few things to learn. You can identify it anytime, anywhere. And then you see this band down toward the bottom. that band is sedimentary rock. Again, nothing about the age, but that's correctly identifying the science. All we're doing, volcanic rock, sedimentary rock. The history means identifying the eyewitnesses. Well, with Republic Mountain, there are no direct eyewitnesses or documents. There are no direct eyewitnesses or documents concerning the geologic timetable. It's what men have told me that I should believe about what I see in the earth. None whatsoever. Now, contrasted with that is our own biblical historical account. Gives us 4 periods of earth history. Now, of course, there are many more you can add to it if you like, but basically you have a creation. You have a pre-flood world that lasted 1,656 years from Adam to Noah. You know that the earth is quite young because Seth was born when? How old was Adam when Seth was born? Well, the scriptures state categorically, Genesis chapter 5, Adam was 130 years old when Seth was born. Now, there were other generations, there were other kids involved, but this is the one God focuses on. By the way, the word Seth means substitute, and there's a lot of interesting overlays in that. So if Adam was 130 years old, how old was the earth when Adam was created? 6 days. Yeah, there you go. Well, yeah, you add the 6 days. Okay, so it's very, very clear, very plain, and that describes the pre-flood world. And then Noah comes along. You have this period called the flood. And then shortly after the flood, after the waters recede, the flood is over, the post-flood period starts. Which period are we in? Post-flood. It began 4,500 years ago. This flood lasted about a year. So you see, if we embrace the biblical view and flow of history, it sets up a framework that we work within. Geologists have their framework. It's a geological timetable. You can't vary from it. It determines everything. Did you know that with radiometric dating even, when you have a radiometric date that comes out in disagreement of the geologic timetable, do you know the radiometric date is thrown out? That's because their framework for all truth about Earth history is a geologic timetable. It's not radiometric dating at all. It's geologic timetable. It's their framework. Our framework needs to be exactly the same way in the biblical view of Earth history. It is the inspired framework. This is what happened, and it began 6,000 years ago. The word philosophy means choosing a belief system. All scientists have a worldview or belief system. Every scientist does. They may not admit it, but they do. Anybody who has any kind of value system at all has a worldview. Something is right and something is wrong, always. The worldview for the secularist excludes the biblical account as a myth and not worthy of consideration. Consequently, there is a false narrative put forward of science versus the Bible. This is always the way it's taught. Science versus the Bible. And if you embrace this, you're a science denier. I think it's interesting. Scientific American, I don't know if you've ever read their magazines. I'll read articles. It's one of the things I do a lot is read articles throughout the year. Here's one. There's an article entitled, How to Debate a Science Denier. So automatically, because you believe the Bible, you're a science denier. Well, that is just as false as you can get. It is really science versus the Bible, or two worldviews. secular geology versus biblical history. That's the long and the short of it. The problem in modern geology really lies in how it's taught, I think. It's taught as earth science, but earth science also includes another aspect called earth history. The two don't belong together. Understanding the earth science doesn't automatically translate into the earth history. The earth sciences, remember, simply observation and testing. That's the earth science. You'll learn that in the Science 1, Room 1. Now, if you want to start talking about the age of the earth, that is a history question. It's not a science question because it cannot be observed. So we have to go to Room 2, and now we break it up. There's earth science and there's earth history. But the problem is it's combined together in one class, one course. You'll learn it at 4th grade, 7th grade, and then not again until college, where your faith is finally destroyed because of it. It's just, it is so convoluted to teach earth science and earth history as one subject. It just doesn't belong. Doesn't belong. So when we talk about this vocabulary, we include these 4 words: observable, testable, repeatable. That's another thing they want to see in science. History, unique one-time events supported by eyewitness and documents. Philosophy, interpretation. Now here's another one we want to add to those 4 words, and that's consensus. Consensus is simply shared opinions. They'll tell me, I've had people tell me, "You're an idiot, Nurre. Thousands of scientists agree with this thing called evolution." I mean, who are you? And I was, well, you know, that may be. In fact, you could add 50,000 scientists may all agree together. But it doesn't make it so, and it doesn't make it fact, it doesn't make it science. It makes it consensus. That's the one thing you can agree with them on. Yeah, that's a consensus, all right. But it has no place in science. It's a different branch altogether. So what are the steps then to interpreting the rocks? I feel like we need to lay that foundation before you start getting into it. Otherwise, it's just a battle. It doesn't need to be, but you have to approach it correctly. The science issue is solved by simply identifying the rock types. I've got a lot of books out there I've written on rock identification. One of the books I have out there, I wrote it for moms. I had more moms coming to me and saying, "What do I do with my kids who love rocks?" And every time we go to the library, I take out 5, 6 books out of the library, and it's all teaching him an evolutionary view toward rock identification. And so years ago, I decided, well, this mom needs to benefit from this whole thing. So I wrote a book called Rock Identification. And all my books from then on really were following this pattern. Solving the history issue relies on the historical framework you see. It does not lie in the rocks. So when we look at Republic Mountain and really examine it from a scientific perspective, we identify the rocks, and there are actually 3 types of rocks. The one we didn't delve into was below that band you see across the bottom of it, that sedimentary rock. There's one below that, which is called plutonic rocks. Now, if we identify all of those, then now we've just completed the science project. Republic Mountain. Top is volcanic. The midway, the band is sedimentary, and the bottommost rock that's buried under the foliage is called plutonic. Now there's a lot of stuff missing. Where are the metamorphic rocks? Where are all of these other rocks that we look at? This is basically the science of Republic Mountain. Now once we've looked at that, that'll help with developing our framework. What about the Earth history? Well, the geologic time scale has taught us a history. And notice that geologic timetable is both a chronology and a genealogy. Now, that should ring all kinds of bells in your head, because what is our Bible? From Genesis on through the Gospels is both a chronology and a genealogy. The books of Chronicles, my goodness, a very fascinating study in genealogy. In the Gospels, genealogy. Genesis 5 and 11, chronology and genealogy. So what have the secularists done? Is that we're sick of this Bible stuff. We're going to develop our own view of Earth history. That's what we've learned for the last 200 years. That determines everything. If we look at our biblical account here, we have 6,000 years of Earth history. We can only put Republic Mountain in just about one place. It's a huge mountain, and no one has ever observed it. So we put it here, connection to the flood. Well, what about the pre-flood? How come it wouldn't be the pre-flood? Maybe God created it that way. Well, if he did, it wouldn't exist anymore once the flood got a hold of it. Because the flood erased everything on the surface of the earth. So we would put it there. What about the rock layers? Well, they really have to fit in the same area. Otherwise, the flood would have destroyed everything. All the evidence would be gone. One of the most fascinating textbooks, this is one of my favorite textbooks, it's a secular textbook on stratigraphy, another one of those vocabulary words. The big word stratigraphy. What are you talking about? This is that stuff you have to learn. Some of it can be very, very difficult, but it's once you grab on to your Greek and Latin roots, urge your grandkids to learn Greek and Latin roots. It is the key to much of the vocabulary of geology. It is a secular framework, and it tells you right up front, the key to Earth history. It's an introduction to stratigraphy. So this book teaches that stratigraphy, whatever this is the key to Earth history. I was fascinated by this title. This is a textbook, and I love it. I've gone through this thing lots and lots of times. It tells me exactly how the secularists think and how they get what they've got. And so it's a very good book. The word stratigraphy was coined in 1865. Literally, in Latin, it means strata writing, or the vernacular is strata writing, but it's writing a history of the earth according to what the strata are saying. Stop right there a minute. I've listened to a lot of rocks. I've never heard anything. But secular scientists believe you can look at a set of rock layers and you can solve the history of the earth and age of the earth and what happened and create a picture. I doubt it. You have to have some kind of a framework you're working within. Modern earth science and earth history are built on secular stratigraphy. So here's how it works. There are three parts to stratigraphy. First one is lithostratigraphy. Another one of those vocabulary words, which means describing the rock types. Lithos is a word that means rock. Second word they use is biostratigraphy. It's using the fossils and the rock layers to tell the story of Earth's life, all the life on the Earth, in the rocks. Now that biostratigraphy is very important because that takes somebody who will arrange it. I rarely have found anything to do with a strict chronology when I look at the rock layers. You may have there's a few rock layers together. What does that tell you? They're rock layers, but that's just about it. You can't come up with a history of it at all. You've got layers of rocks in which some fossils are buried in them. It's not consistent. There are areas around the world where fossils are mixed up. They're in some layers, not in other layers. Some of them are in layers where they shouldn't be, and some of them are in layers that are a lot older than those fossils should be. So it's really, it's really a mixed up thing. But anyway, this is used a lot to chart it. And then a third word in stratigraphy is chronostratigraphy. This is assigning ages to the rock layers. Now, if you've gotten this far in geology, you're way beyond the first semester. You're way beyond the first year. First year, you spent studying Charles Lyell and his contributions to geology and what it means. And then if you survive that, now in the second year of geology, you start really getting into some of this stuff here. The key to Earth history in this book is very clearly stated. Stratigraphy is nothing more than an interpretation of what is there. There are two ways to look at the fossils in the rocks. One way is you can look at them as if they evolved over millions and millions of years. That's a way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is as a result of the catastrophic flood 4,500 years ago. Those are diametrically opposed. You can't prove either one by the science field. There's no testing. There's no observation of it. You can categorize things, but that won't give you an age. If you took, I used to do a lot of work with Roman coins. Nothing would frustrate me more than to pick up a Roman coin and the Latin on it that would identify the coin and how old it was gone. Now you've got an image you can hardly make out. It's a Roman coin, genuine Roman coin, but it's worthless because you can't tell who it is, whose likeness is it, and there's nothing to identify the period of time. So it's just it's an old Roman coin that is worthless. That frustrated me a lot, because I did everything I could to try to discover that date. Couldn't do it, couldn't pinpoint that. But hey, there it is, it's a Roman coin. It's worthless. So stratigraphy, if we add lithostratigraphy, is the science here. It's identifying what the rocks are. It has nothing to do with the history or philosophy yet. So when we look at Mount Republic, we identify lithostratigraphy is just identifying what kind of rock is that. There are rules you follow when you are identifying volcanic rock. Same with sedimentary rock. If it has fossils in it, which this does, it's sedimentary rock. I would say 99% of the fossils you find are going to be in sedimentary rock. And the reasons would be obvious when you study them. Plutonic rock would be rocks like granite. So this presents a very interesting puzzle. You've got these plutonic rocks, or rocks like granite on the bottom. You've got the sedimentary rock on top of that, and you've got the volcanic rock on top of that. Now you begin to start putting the picture together. Maybe the flood isn't all of that far off. You have the creation at the bottom with the plutonic rock. No one's ever seen a plutonic rock form today. No geologist has ever seen granite form. So what do you do with it? Well, it makes a good foundation rock, and that's why it's called plutonic. It's the god of the underworld. The sedimentary rock makes sense, a lot of it. This is called, one of the names for this band here is called the Great Unconformity. It goes about 12 miles. You can follow it. Same type of stuff. I've taken my rock hammer to some of this stuff all the way along. And it's got the fossils in it. And very interesting fossils. And then the volcanic rock really lines up with the Yellowstone activity. So you begin to see a different kind of a framework. And sometimes the science of the rocks begins to help you do that. Volcanic rock, of course, comes from volcanoes. Sedimentary rock is water and mud. They contain most of the marine fossils. Plutonic rocks, like granite, those are foundation rocks. When you look at the layers in these rocks, the sedimentary layers, nothing about the layering gives you a clue as to how old it is. They're just layers. Rock layers are layers. Nothing about time is intrinsic to the rocks unless we have directly observed their formation. So now we go to the next one, biostratigraphy, using the fossils and the rock layers to tell the story. Secular framework is completely at odds with the biblical framework. When you look at the geologic timetable, it tells you that life began in the oceans. If you know your first chapter of Genesis very well, where did life get? What was the first life? And by life, I mean DNA. What was the first life? Are you just sleeping, or are you just honestly trying to figure it out? Birds and fish. Anybody else? Yeah, do plants have DNA? Yeah, they do. So day 3 of creation. So the first living things, they're not nefesh life like you and me or other animals, but they do have their own DNA structure, very complex, and they follow the whole system of kinds. But these came about first, day 3 of creation. When were sea creatures created? This is why I have my geology learning center, so we can drill this stuff and the kids really can figure this out. Well, day 5 of creation. When were birds created? Day 5. When were land creatures, the nefesh, the real nefesh, when were they created? Day 6. When was man created? Day 6. So you've got a progression of creation in Genesis. It looks nothing like this. Here we see an evolutionary progression. Sea fossils are buried on the bottom because they were the first things to be created or developed in evolution. And then you don't get up to man until millions of years later, about 550 million years later. That just doesn't line up with Genesis at all. So biostratigraphy, according to Genesis, would be seeing, of course, the plutonic rocks of creation, land animals, sea creatures. Chapter 1 is the origin of the biosphere in 6 days. Kinds were created with room for variation within kinds. That's the true biostratigraphy. Chronostratigraphy, assigning ages to the rocks. Secular geology relies on their interpretation of the fossils and radiometric dating to determine the ages of the fossils and the rocks. The geologic time scale is both, remember, a chronology and a genealogy of Earth history. And aside from the ages, it's completely contradictory to the book of Genesis. Chronostratigraphy in Genesis is really determined by the order of creation, pre-flood world, the flood, and the post-flood. You have it right here in Genesis chapter 5. All of these guys are laid out. There's no interruption between one patriarch and the next. And you add those up, you get about 1,656 years between Adam and the flood. So which one is the real science among these three, according to the secularists, how they use them? It's the lithostratigraphy, identifying the rocks and the fossil types. And that's pretty easy to do if you just get a little bit of a background. In order to accept the secular biostratigraphy to build an Earth history, you have to have lots and lots of assumptions. You make a lot of assumptions. A lot of geology is built on assumptions. If this, then this. Evolution is historical, or at least it claims to be, as it is demonstrated in the fossils. That's what we're taught. Evolution is true, and therefore is the science, and therefore you are the science denier. But you see what's happened there. This evolution of word definition and teaching has it's morphed into things that if you just think and break it down, you'll see, well, there's the error right there. The error is in your thinking. And this is what we've got to teach our youth. How to think and how to break down these complex things that we're being told are true. And we've got to make them better thinkers. And the only way to do that is spending time with them, concentrated time in doing this. Evolutionist science is accepted by all reasonable scientists. I don't know any who would dare contradict it. Those that do either don't last very long, or they're so far up the totem pole that they don't have to worry about it. Modern geology trumps the Bible. That's what we're taught. Genesis has a lot of, and this is what happens, Genesis has a lot of chronological mistakes, we're told. And that I should not believe everything in the Bible. And science really is the only true guide to truth. And this begins to develop in the minds of people until the culture has bought into it. Every single problem that we have in our culture today can be directly traced back to a rejection of some truth in the book of Genesis. And I think one of it is that we've stopped really equipping people to think this way. Those are peripheral issues. We develop on the deeper issues of soul and spirit. Well, this is a major area of soul and spirit. And the conclusions are obvious. The earth is older than the Bible. The creation and flood accounts in the Bible are myth. And radiometric dating is accurate and true science. One real thing here before I close this down, we're not going to get into radiometric dating. It's a study all itself. But here's a few things I want you to be aware of with radiometric dating. The conclusion, of course, with the seculars is the Bible has nothing to offer geology. It's very interesting. Since 1797, modern geology has been actively destroying our faith, and I think it's been by purpose. This whole movement called the Enlightenment is very similar to what our culture is going through today called wokeism. It's just another enlightenment. That's all. In fact, the word is slang for enlightenment. We're going through another enlightenment. And it's really an endarkment, but it'll have the same effect that 1700s had. And in realizing this, we should be thinking this. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. So very quickly, radioactivity and radiometric dating really based on several assumptions. When you remember just this one thing, the geologic timetable is the Bible of modern geology. Most of the dates back to the Cambrian, you'll see it down there at the bottom, 550 million years old. Much of it below that was a big question mark in geologists' mind at the time. Most of these dates were worked out in the 1800s before the discovery of radioactivity. Radioactivity was discovered in 1897. The first radiometric clock was 1912. This table was set up by the mid-1800s. So they'd already drawn the conclusions the Earth was old. How did they get to those conclusions? It wasn't by radiometric dating. It didn't exist. Radioactivity was virtually unknown. So it was a philosophical shift that took place, and that is the foundation of modern geology, not science. Radioactivity takes hold when we base, of course, when we embrace a lot of assumptions. So our conclusions then about Earth history, are they based on philosophies and consensus, or are they based on science and history? Well, most of geology is why I say about 80% of it is really based on philosophical ideas. So I wanted to just conclude it there. Hopefully this will give you a little bit. A lot of my books out there, they go from pre-K all the way through high school. And the idea with that is that you take geology, break it down into its subgroups, and you teach it from kids to kids from pre-K all the way through high school. They're going to leave your home one of these days. And it's a good way to just impress some truth onto those young minds when you finish. And so there's a whole curriculum out there based on that. So with that, if you wanted to...
Thank you. This, give me a hand, huh? Thanks, Pat. So we have time for a few questions. I'll bring it around to you. Anybody have a question? Yes.
So we're talking about the table that was developed before radioactive dating.
Yeah.
Haven't they used radioactive dating to prove some of the table?
Well, that's what it appears they've done. But I've seen this with several archaeologists where they say, many people think we use radiometric dating to date our finds. We don't use it at all. It's window dressing. We only use it if it agrees with what we've already decided. And so there's a good book if you want to wade through it. It took me 3 times to get through it. It's called The Mythology of Modern Radiometric Dating Methods. It's a good book. And what he does is he goes through what he calls the wastebasket of radiometric dates. And the question there is, how many dates did they go through before they selected the one that gets published? That was his big question. And he was able to locate this for several things. So if the date doesn't work out, the Bible of modern geology, the geologic timetable, decides which one is going to be used. But it's never used to form, and it was never used to form the geologic timetable.
Oh, I can speak loud enough.
We need it for the audio.
Yeah, I may not be able to hear you.
Doesn't radiometric dating assume that the rate of decay is the same all the way through?
Yeah,
we know that the rate of decay cannot be the same exact rate from beginning to end. Things decay at different rates.
Yeah, that's true. There's about 4 or 5 assumptions that are made. If you study any chemistry at all, you find out really how easy it is to fiddle around with the atom. And in fact, if you look at the synthetic elements, they're all as a result of fiddling around with the element that came before it. They're fiddling around with the inside of the atom. And when we do experiments for the kids on breaking chemical bonds, you are fiddling around with atomic behavior. You are, now it's not on the scale that nuclear stuff is, but it's the same principle. The atom is what gets played with. So when we have this radiometric decay or radioactive decay where it's the inside of the atom that has been disrupted somehow, no one's been able to explain it. Why is that? Why do we have some elements that are falling apart, and this quest to get back to some sort of a normalcy? And well, I think it's all related, of course, to the irreversible fall. We trace that back to Genesis. Corruption is not just your mind, but it's the physical. All of you who are either approaching my age or a little older than I am, you've experienced the consequences of the fall. I'm sure you have, where the arthritis just seems to be getting worse and worse. You know, I don't care how much balance of nature I take, it's not getting any better. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. That's because I'm falling apart, and that's due directly to the fall. We're being corrupted. So the same principles can be applied to radiometric dating and radioactivity. All we're doing is we're playing with the atom, and we're delving into it to see what's going on with it. We don't understand it, but it's there, it's happening. And it's, I think it's just a good chemistry course would really help you understand more of this.
Isn't the other part of radioactive dating, element A decays to B? And so we can measure today how much A and how much B in there, but there's nothing that tells us what it started with in the first place.
Yeah.
So besides, even if you had a half-life or a decay rate that's fixed, you still don't know what the starting point is, so
Yeah.
that negates it too, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, now you're talking about, you're not talking about a science question, you're talking about a history question. The only way to correctly interpret atomic decay is by having a framework that can explain it, a historical framework. That's our book of Genesis. You can't have uranium half-life, I'll just throw this one out. Uranium half-life is 4.6 billion years old, at roughly the age of the Earth. I'm not sure how all that works, but you had the half-life, 4.6 billion years. Well, I want to know, how did you get that? What sources did you use? Is there any history? Some scientists lived into old age and wrote a history of 4.6 billion years of radioactive decay of uranium. Well, no, it's all based on something they've seen here, and they've assumed that it has stayed the same ad infinitum. Well, if you accept the biblical history, that can't be, because there was a flood at some point 4,500 years ago that would have upset every chemical process, every geological process, everything. It would have upset everything. All geological processes were affected by the flood. That's why we have a lot of altered rocks today and altered minerals. I'll give you an example, opal. Very pretty mineral, but it's kind of a submineral. You know, it has the same chemical formula as quartz, SiO2. So it's a corrupted form of quartz. It's very soft. It's not as hard as quartz. Quartz is very hard. Opal is very, very soft. What happened to it? Well, we never saw it, but I can tell you, based on the geological consequences of the flood, opal is altered quartz in some way. The process of the flood, the heat, and the chemical processes probably interfered with it. There's a lot of examples like that, a lot of things that are altered. We've seen altered rocks and altered minerals throughout the rock sphere. It's an interesting study, by the way.
Thank you, Pat. I think we probably need to stop at this point. Pat, would you thank the Lord for
sure.
us?
Yeah, sure will. Lord, we ask you tonight that, first of all, you'd give us a deeper respect for your word and a deeper understanding of it and a deeper desire to know it and to study it. It's one of those things we never get tired of it because it's a living thing, the living word. And we ask you, Lord, that's where it really lies. We ask you to teach us, teach our kids, and help equip us and our churches and our kids, our families, to be engaged in this kind of a conflict. Amen.
Thank you. Okay, is this on? Go ahead and visit Vicki and Pat's table back there. He's got all his materials, or a good portion of it, plus some samples, and take some time and ask him some more questions. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Next week, or next month, we're going to have a treat with a local gentleman who's been here many times before. He's part of our board of directors here. Dan is going to give us a really neat presentation on Noah's flood, kind of from a different point of view. He's going to be doing what's called, what did he say, the math of the great flood. Did you know there was mathematics involved in Noah's flood? So you'll have to come and find out what he means by that. And it's really going to be a good presentation to help kind of more visualize the reality of Noah's flood and what it was like. And since we have all these conceptions of the small little boat with the giraffe out the window, right? So he's going to be talking something a little bit different about that. In addition to Pat's book table, I'd encourage you to look at our Apologetics book table. I like to, there's a couple books that I think, or a couple materials I think I'd like to share with you. One is a series, this one's called Have You Considered? It's 365 chapters, 1 page per chapter. And it's really neat because it talks about all kinds of different subjects in creation, evolution, apologetics. There's 3 different volumes. I've read 2 of them now, and I just sort of can't put them down. So the other one that I'd like to talk to you about is a series of little DVDs that are called ministry DVDs, and they're very inexpensive, and they're a good thing to buy and give to friends and family and your checkout person at the store, because and this is one of my favorites, The God of Wonders, because it has a very good gospel presentation to the end tied to the attributes of God expressed in creation. It's just a wonderful DVD, and it's the one that will give the person a clear message of the gospel. Highly recommend this one. So with that, I think we're done for the evening. So there's some refreshment at the back. Is there some, I think there might be some cookies. I'm not sure. We'll see. Go back and check it out. So thanks a lot.